Okay, good morning. I would like to call the Wednesday, May 17th DAC meeting to order. We will begin with roll call. Haley Gallery, present. Stephen Cole, present. Tika Hartman, absent. Eleanor Burke, present. Miguel Gutierrez, present. Louis Haywood, absent. Lindsay Black, absent. Joanna Farley, absent. At this time, would the committee make a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from the April 19th meeting?
I will make a motion to adopt as written.
I'll second.
We have a motion by CPC and a second by Capital Projects. All in favor? Aye, and the motion passes. We will now begin with the consideration of dockets. The staff will present a brief overview, and then the applicant will have 10 minutes to present. We will then hear public comments, and each person will have 2 minutes to speak. If there is opposition, the applicant will have 5 minutes to rebut. The committee will then discuss the project and can ask questions, and then we'll vote on the application. The second item on today's agenda is the consideration of design review 1623 for a property at 4227 Magazine Street. We have Favio, Castán signed up to speak on behalf of the applicant, and Bryan is the staff member reviewing this case. So this proposal is triggered for DAC review because it's in a character preservation corridor. And it's a 3-story structure with a commercial space on the ground floor and 2 residential spaces on the 2nd and 3rd floor. That's just a brief overview, but Fabio, you now have 10 minutes to present.
Sure. As you mentioned, we're planning to do a mixed-use building in this space with commercial on the ground floor and some residents up top, somewhat typical of the Edison area. We're looking to do a combination of cladding, brick, and siding, so as to keep with the same aesthetic as some of the buildings. And we're proposing to do something different with some sort of elegant blue glazed brick, just to we think it'd be a really nice aesthetic that would bring some pop to the street as well. We are looking to try to do sort of our own interpretation of a Juliet balcony, trying to have the windows on the 2nd floor of the units sort of bifold and open up, and that way they can interact with the street. We were kind of pressed for square footage, and so we saw that as a way to give back to the residences up top while still having some way of interacting with the street. And we're trying to comply as well with as much of the transparency as possible to the ground floor of the street. We are also attempting to articulate each opening with this shroud-like forms and allow the brick and the cladding to sort of dance around the different facades so that it's not just the one facade, but as it turns the corner, it also can have a nice presence.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment? Okay, if not, now the committee can have a discussion.
So the rendering above, so you're not really showing me the context of the adjacent building, so I'm not really sure how the windows line up and how the cantilever entry. First of all, the cantilever is not consistent with some of the rhythm of the windows and the entries and some of the general context. So I'm kind of having a reaction to that initially,
Sure.
and I just want to be very specific of what it is that my concerns are. I deduced that maybe the location of the windows just don't have any relation to any of the buildings on either side. So I think there's going to be a misalignment, and there's going to be a break in the rhythm component. I don't really know where that's coming from, so it's just kind of throwing me off a little bit. I'm a little bit thrown off by this.
Sure.
And I'm actually wondering if maybe if the entry into the commercial space and the entry to the condos from the side alley, if they were on the same side, I wonder if it would sort of allow the design elements to sort of self-regulate a little bit, because I think I think requirement-wise, you may have needed two separate, but it's not really making too much sense to me. So, the building is elevated. Is it required to be elevated for the BFE? Okay. So that's kind of setting the stage a little bit for, the scale of the entry on the left side just seems underwhelming. The scale of the entry sequence, the scale of the entry sequence seems underwhelming compared to the intent of the cantilever. I think you're kind of having something contradictory happening spatially that doesn't give you the wow factor that I think you're hoping for. Because you have to go up the stairs, and then the cantilever is like this bold movement, but your height of that floor is not really, the space is not really there to kind of give it this impetus, and it's just not really working for me. Eleanor, do you have anything to add, or probably a better description?
No, it's interesting because I looked at this proposal right after I'd ridden the entire length of Magazine Street on my way to work yesterday, and was marveling at the diversity that exists in terms of the structures, and that often, inevitably leads to the dynamism and the character and the interest of the street. And there are some new contemporary infill buildings near to this that have been approved along the way. And so while in one way I really like how it continues that dialogue of things being so diverse and so different, but I do have some concerns that it now sandwiched between these two historicist and historic structures is sort of not having any kind of dialogue with its neighbors in the context. And I feel like because of the issues you pointed out, Miguel, that's kind of why. I love the idea of blue tile. I think that's so interesting. But I'm concerned about how the front of the building is very planar and doesn't include very many projections that are quite common on the buildings within the context, so that it's, in addition to its contemporary style, that takes it sort of out of conversation with what's going on around it. It also doesn't really relate to anything that's going on around it at all. So it could be dropped anywhere.
I agree with that a lot.
So but I'm torn.
Right. Because I wanna like it.
Because it's interesting, and Magazine Street is diverse, but I think a couple of moves could maybe bring it, into sort of compatibility with its neighbors. I agree about the cantilever, sort of taking it out of what's typically found on that streetscape, and the way the windows are ribbon window arrangement rather than punched windows, and the lack of projections. I think those are the key issues that I see. I know that owners don't want to lease the air rights over the public right of way, and that's a hassle, but that's the sort of there's another building like 2 buildings down that's just very planar at the front, 1920s warehouse building. So they're not completely out of set, but it's just maybe I don't know quite what to do with it. Do you have any other ideas?
So there is a flatness to it that is accentuated by the cantilever, and the storefront on the ground floor is inset a little bit. So there's these contradictory moves. If you're going to make it feel flat, like really that vertical profile, when you inset it and put those planters, you're kind of taking that gesture, you're taking the power away from that gesture. I think there's just, what do you think about our comments? Because I hate to say something and kind of guide you towards doing something, but we're kind of,
Sure.
stating an overall sense of what our
Sure.
feelings
So
are.
a lot of the design decisions that we made were due to certain requirements, like in terms of the heights of the windows, the height of the first floor. We needed to have those windows at a certain height, and and the structure sort of began to dictate the heights of the windows above it. So we tried to put the fenestration in a way that it would read nicely and it would have a relationship to each other, but it was difficult to have relationships with buildings next to each other just because of that commercial first floor pushing our ceiling height pretty high. And the BFE also raised us a decent amount, two and then some feet. So the ability for somebody to come in off the street was kind of important for us. And so adding a way to enter that wasn't protruding into the sidewalk was going to be difficult while not taking away too much of the space inside. So those things began to shape how we wanted to have that entry sequence and sort of the relationship of the windows with the other things around the surroundings. In terms of the cantilever, I'm still trying to understand. I was going to ask some more questions about that. I'm still trying to grasp what the main comment about the cantilever is. Whether it's just it's not inviting enough, it's just not relating enough to other things around it. That's the one aspect I'm still.
Yeah, one, it's not relating, and two, I'm just not seeing the design following through. It's just not. It's not working. And then when you inset the storefront, you're kind of also just taking away the planar aspect of creating this rectangle and carving out this space. You're kind of voiding the intent of that move. So I'm going to go back to my question. Would you consider maybe shifting the cantilever from the left side to the right side, and then combining the ingress to both aspects of the building, where you actually have the negative space of the void of the cantilever and the alley, and then you have this entry that feels more consequential, and then it breaks off logically into the other means of egress to the condos through the alley. That programmatically, because those two things are not combined, it just.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So
no,
maybe,
we definitely tried that one.
Yeah.
And the issue that we ran into was the two exits needed to be a certain distance from each other.
needing to be
And that just that kind of bummed it, because it would have, I think, created a much more of a wow effect when creating that void space for the entrance.
Okay. Tell me about the wood component from the ground floor going up.
Sure. So the idea was that any time that we have an opening and there is no glass, we wanted to break up the surface material with something that was warmer to sort of contrast the blue and the glass and sort of the darker metal or trim work. And so anytime there's sort of that punch, sort of carving of the opening with the shroud, as a way to soften that, we introduced this wood clad material.
So that vertical line, it just seems to be arbitrary. It's actually reinforcing the side of the building that isn't cantilevered in a way that, because they're two different materials, they're competing. So it's either take it out, let the cantilever do its thing, don't have the distraction of this vertical line, bring in a whole other element, and integrate it to a planner, integrate it to a stair. Like, think about it as something that's a little bit more bespoke to what your design intent is. It's just not. It's not coming.
The planter for sure is something that we can detail out to integrate into the design a little bit better, so that it does interact with the sidewalk, and it makes that entry sequence read better as well. Removing the vertical element, I can see what you're trying to say, that it sort of can seem arbitrary. So we can definitely figure out a way to sort of lead it and let the openings do the talking when it comes to those moments.
I wonder,
I was just gonna ask, are there any waivers that are being requested for this project?
No.
And, what's the floor to ceiling height of the second floor?
Second, 10 feet.
Okay. So the cantilever in your rendering actually comes in lower than the balcony of the building next door, even though you have a really, you say you have a very, what's the floor to ceiling height of the ground floor?
12.
12.
To be
Zoom
so.
in on that, yeah.
I mean, it'd be great if the rendering was in the context of the
Yeah,
building, so you
right.
can see the lines.
I don't know, it just seems, I'm looking at the photograph of the building as constructed, and it just seems hard to believe that the cantilever at 12 feet on a raised up base would actually have that relationship to the building next door. Like, I'm not certain this rendering is correct. In terms of what's happening on the ground, which makes it hard to evaluate. Anyway, sorry, Dan.
yeah, I just feel like the building reads very top heavy, and any form of cantilever on this seems very uninviting, especially with the transparency on the ground floor. It kind of plays up the massing of the building, and I would feel a little less welcome and invited walking in. So I'm not sure whether it stays where it is or goes to the opposite side. I don't think that it would make it very inviting. Seems kind of heavy. And then you mentioned transparency, that was guiding your window opening sizes. That's calculated between 2 feet above ground level and 8 feet. So you can, from the 8 to 12 feet, you can introduce a different type of material. You don't have to have the transparent surface.
Okay. 2 feet to 8 feet.
So, Miguel, if they can't relocate the entrance to create sort of a more unified vision of entry, what do you think could improve what's happening?
So I am seeing, go back to the other elevation that we had. Oops, the one over here, that one. So, void, disruption, maybe something here. Could you put fenestration on the alley side? I mean, you have this pattern that is just so frontal, and you're kind of locked into this cantilever and asymmetry, but because nothing's happening on the side, except for your alley axis, which is an opportunity that you're not exploring.
Yeah.
I think maybe that could help if you can't move it. Just create some balance on that blank side where you're sending people down the alley to the entry into their condos, which, I mean, that should be as spectacular as, the front entry if possible. So, what do you think about that idea? Extending the storefront to the side and.
Well, I guess does that then make the whole second floor cantilevered over first floor? And would that not take it more out of the context?
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of grappling here.
Right. No, me too. And
Yeah.
I think it's maybe possible for us at this point to sort of register our concerns and ask them to sort of go back to just tweak it and see if they can come up with something that sort of.
Yeah, but I'd also like to see the rendering in the actual site context, so we
Yeah, I
can
would
see the
too,
alignments.
because-
Yeah. So I would recommend that, because it's just useless for us to tell you what to do, because that's not really what we intend to do. We're just trying to.
Come up with ideas,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's not sitting well within its context, and it's a bit, as Haley said, top heavy, with it, and that heaviness of the building resting on, without it coming down to the ground, this cantilever is just not necessarily.
I mean, could the planners go away and maybe the fenestration, the idea of the fenestration continues to the ground, so you could, there's this thing about gravity, you're suspending gravity when you're doing a cantilever, and then you're contradicting by putting the planners there and by insetting the storefront. So it's just not, it's not doing what you want it to do. So yes, would you consider tweaking it and coming back and showing us your tweaks within the true context, the two buildings rendered on either side?
Sure.
So we could see how it works.
Yeah, and I think also the planters take away from the brick sort of following through and underneath the windows, so it sort of reads as more of that void being cut out.
And maybe the idea of the wood line, I don't know, I'm kind of at a loss with that. I don't even know what the purpose of it is. It's really not adding.
And also, when you come back, Eleanor mentioned a few other examples in the area, maybe not immediately adjacent, but if you can provide us some images of other structures along Magazine Street.
Yeah, brick is not that common, as you said in your narrative. It is, when you do have it occur, it's usually a building that is sort of different from the regular, New Orleans technology, usually a commercial institutional building. But, I mean, it is interesting, right? I mean, the color of the brick, I mean, we do.
Well, it's a glazed tile, right? It's a blue glazed tile.
Blue glazed brick.
Oh, blue glazed brick. Oh, I thought it was a tile with a gloss. Oh. Interesting.
Does that change your comment about it? Because we were kind of against the brick.
Okay, yeah, it does. I'm not that into it. I like the idea of a blue tile, but if it's blue brick, I think it seems, while I embrace the diversity of Magazine Street, that sort of does take it very much out of the
What is it about the
vocabulary.
brick that is just skewed?
I don't think it seems very counter to the context, the building materials that you see. I mean, often there's, brick that's painted, but a brick with an infused color. And obviously there are examples of, very trendy, gray brick buildings, constructed in the last decade in New Orleans, and I've felt as they've gone up that they don't really work very well in our historic context, and I am having a hard time seeing how blue brick would work any better.
Okay.
All right. You think we're ready for a motion?
Well, I'll make a motion and ask that they, and to defer and request that they, consider studying based on the recommendations and comments that we've made, sort of revisit the design and return to the DAC.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by HDLC to defer this case until the applicant submits revised drawings based on the comments provided, and the second by Capital Projects. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? And the motion passes. Okay, well, thank